Well, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you. I'm Simon Beardsley from Lincolnshire Chamber of Commerce, and a very warm welcome to this Chamber Connect webinar. I'm here to host the session today, which is looking like it's going to be a really insightful one, and it will look into the Kickstart scheme. So thank you for joining us and connecting with us virtually today. Our Chamber Connect series of webinars have replaced our normal face-to-face events at this time. And we feel it's really important to continue to inform and connect, particularly in this way. I'd just like to make you aware that this webinar is being recorded and you'll be able to access it via our website shortly after this event, but we'll also send you some links as well where you can follow up and see any bits that you've either missed or you want to rerun a little bit later on as well. Before I start, I just want to acknowledge the challenging environment that we are in at this particular time and are operating within. The Kickstart scheme itself is just one of a raft of initiatives that the government has rolled out at this time, with other support schemes, including the extension of furlough, the local restriction support grant if your business is closed. Throughout Lincolnshire now, local authorities have opened up that support grant. If you were to look at their website, there's details about how you can claim. There's also other support grants coming along, the additional restrictions grant, and keep an eye out on local authority websites for that one as well. Whether it be the extension to the loan schemes, the Coronavirus Business Interruption Scheme, or the Corona Larger Business Interruption Scheme, the Bounce Back Loan or the Future Funds, all of those are open until the 31st of January now. The extension, an increase in self-employment income support scheme, or some of the new initiatives that are focused on small and medium-sized enterprises, such as the peer-to-peer networking introduction that Lincolnshire or Greater Lincolnshire businesses can enter into. If you've not looked at our website, www.links-chamber.co.uk, there is further support on HR, but there's also a raft of things to help and support in this particular time for you to access and find out more information about. If you go to our website, there's a tab there, Recovery and Support. Click on that and there's lots more information that you can find when you go there. So this section itself is meant to be very interactive. We need your help and support in terms of asking questions. The way to do so is at the bottom of the Zoom screen, you'll find a Q&A button. If you click on it, it will open a box up somewhere on your screen to which you can then type questions into. If you do so, we'll be able to come to those at the end of the session. If we can't answer any of them, we'll certainly come back to you, but we'll try to do our best to do so in this particular part of the session. So how's it going to work? Well, in a moment, I'm going to hand you over to Ian Fisher and Graham Metcalf from the Department of Work and Pensions, and they're going to run through a presentation on screen on the scheme itself. We'll then move over to a question and answer session. And I say it's really important that if you've got something that's particular to your business that you would like to find out a little bit more about, that you pop the questions in the question and answer box, and we can either come to you or we can read the questions out and then get you some answers to those. A lot of the time is the presentations will be quite generic, and you might just be feeling specifically to my business, what does that mean? It's your chance now to ask the experts. We are expecting the session to run between about 45 minutes and an hour. So if that's all good, I'm going to hopefully get Ian and Graham to switch on their video now, and you'll be able to see them. We'll then start sharing the screen and they'll run through their presentation. So Ian and Graham, it's over to you.
Thanks very much, Simon, and thanks very much for asking us along today and giving us the opportunity to share some information around the Kickstart scheme. So just by way of introduction, my name's Graham Metcalf. I'm the Partnership Manager for DWP in the Lincolnshire area, and my colleague Ian Fisher is on the call along with myself, who's Mr. Kickstart in Lincolnshire, monitoring progression of the scheme, all of the changes to guidance and the developing picture that we're seeing. So we will share our details through the progression of the conversation in the chat, so that you're able to contact us should you need to outside of the call with other issues that come up that we don't encounter today, or further thoughts beyond today's webinar. Okay, so if we could go to the slides then, please, and I'll talk you through what this scheme looks like. Thank you very much. So again, that's just a reconfirmation of who we are, what roles we populate in and around the Lincolnshire area. So next slide, please. Okay, so just to take you through, again, mindful, I was having a chat with Simon just before we started, which some of you may have heard. Scheme was announced as part of the Plan for Jobs response from the Chancellor back in summer. And the difference between this scheme and the other schemes that have got extensions to funding, for example, traineeship and apprenticeship, is that this scheme is a brand new one. So it has been an evolving picture, and from a standing start, in fact, although some of you may be aware of employer subsidy schemes that have run previously, going back to Future Jobs Fund, and then before that, even New Deal, which is going back a fair way now. So it's not as if we've not been, as a department, involved in employer subsidy schemes previously. However, this one is an inception from new, and that has created some challenges from a standing start. We've initially been overwhelmed with interest, which is really encouraging, but it's been quite challenging to work through the initial volumes of interest that's created. So to just give some broader details of the scheme, as I say, it is one of the Plan for Jobs announcements from the Chancellor. The scheme itself is indulgently funded, and that is because its intention is to run from now. Actually, it's available now, and there are placements on our systems now, to run right through to be referred into up until December the 31st next year, with the 6-month placements running and concluding in May, June in 2022. So it is a well-funded scheme, a well-funded concept. The funding there, and there is more detail in this in later slides, however, just briefly, the intent behind the scheme is to fund the wages for 25 hours a week for the young person on placement, and which is dependent on their age range. So what the requirement is to pay the national minimum wage for their age range whilst they're on the scheme. To just say that it doesn't have to be limited to 25 hours. If employers are in a position to pay more, there's more hours in the job and they're able to do the top up, that's absolutely fine. And we are seeing examples of that in the early stages. One of the first series of jobs to go live have been placed by Tesco, and Tesco have given a commitment to not reclaim the funds, in fact, but I obviously acknowledge that perhaps in a different position to many other employers. However, their intention has not been to reclaim, and their commitment is to pay the national minimum wage at 25 and over to all participants as well. So that's a really strong offer, and they're not reclaiming funds as part of their involvement in the scheme. Thank you. Next slide, please. So just give a bit of an idea of young people that are in and around our customer bases currently, to give an idea of potential volumes. So what this slide shows is a reflection of our district, the DWP district area. So the district area that we operate in is Lincolnshire, Nottinghamshire and Rutland. Obviously, Ian and myself cover the Lincolnshire area. So what you'll see there on the left are the job centres, the 19 job centres that that we have in and around our district area. The figures in the first box, as it says at the head, September 2019, just gives a year-on-year comparison. If you go to the end, to September 2020, and you can see the uplift in register sizes for young people. It's fair to say that there's been a general 100% uplift in our register sizes year on year through the pandemic. And as a consequence, what we're mindful of is the potential squeezing effect that can have for young people when they are competing in a labour market that has many more people in it, less available jobs, and also more competition with skilled and experienced people. So that tends to have, in previous downturns, a squeezing effect on them, and that's where previously employer subsidy schemes, youth initiatives have come along to just try and create a pathway to opportunity and development for young people. And hopefully, as things progress and time elapses, we'll get back to a different position, the one we're currently in now, where perhaps opportunities are a little bit more forthcoming in the general labour market than they perhaps are now. Thank you. Next slide, please. So how the scheme works, I've touched briefly on the duration of the placements. They are for a 6-month period, and they're for young people aged 16 to 24 who are recipients of universal credit. So they very much are developmental placements. So it is probably wise to try and manage expectation to some degree, and saying the candidates that are going to be coming the way of employers potentially won't be the finished article. However, there will be some strong candidates in there for sure. We've got some graduates that are with us now because of the lack of opportunity that's befallen them since courses and degrees have finished. So we do have an eclectic mix of people on our customer bases. General eligibility is that they need to be, my apologies, they need to be at risk of long-term unemployment, which is a pretty generic phrase, and actually could apply to most young people that are through on our customer bases and are being dealt with as buyers currently. So the idea is that the placements are in fact developmental. So that's also a factor a consideration to factor in that. We hope that through the opportunities that are created, the young person is going to be better placed when they come to the end of that placement to be competitive in the labour market in whatever way that labour market looks there. There is no expectation of a consolidation from the placement into full employment. However, what we've seen in previous circumstances is where young people have the opportunity to spend that duration of time in the workplace and to progress and impress, then there naturally will be conversion, and we do expect to see that. And certainly where there are opportunities to progress beyond the scheme into perhaps apprenticeship placements and things of that nature, then there are organisations closely linked, and I believe the Chamber's approach is to go primarily through Lincoln College, who are definitely looking to be able to engineer those types of solutions and opportunities for the young people that go on the scheme. There are two routes in order to participate in the scheme for employers. Either if an employer has a large enough base of opportunities, they can apply directly in their own right if those opportunities number 30 or more over the lifetime of the scheme, or those employers with smaller numbers can act through a gateway body, which is the role the Chamber and Lincoln College and others around the county are looking to be able to assist those smaller employers or those employers with less volume opportunities with. So it's fair to say that the majority of opportunities we so far see in the Lincolnshire area are predominantly available through the gateway bodies. Previous terminology has included the phrase intermediary, but it's that type of role that the Chamber and Lincoln College are looking to progress. Just a final thing here on the link at the bottom. There again, as I mentioned, the scheme has evolved and information has been coming out more and more, some today in fact actually, which we'll try and incorporate, which is encouraging. The links on this slide take you to the grant funding agreement and how that works. So we'll talk more about that on a later slide in terms of the funding model. Okay, thanks. Next slide, please. Okay, so I've described a little on the last slide of what the role of a gateway representative is, but in theory, it's for an organisation to act as a representative body for those employers with less than 30 opportunities, and what their role includes once they get to the number of having 30 more opportunities is through the submission. There are some due diligence checks that DWP complete from a national perspective. I should have mentioned before that the scheme is a nationally managed scheme, so a lot of the exchanges and information on gov.uk goes through national teams for administration, and this part of the process is done through the Cabinet Office, part of their spotlight process. and they're looking to be able to complete those due diligence checks through various references to previous involvement from the employer, involvement from us, what their current history looks like, and just to provide assurance that we are going to be dealing and funding with valid and robust and established employers and gateways wherever we can. So the employer's from an employer's perspective, they can choose however they wish to be represented, either by, if they're connected to a trade body, can connect through that mechanism. If they're connected through geography, can absolutely do that. If it's a sectorial specific need and have got an established relationship with an organisation that's operating in that space, absolutely fine. And we do have other organisations such as Lincoln College Seats of Learning that are operating in the gateway body role too as well. So there is quite a wide suite of options available. What we should say, clearly from a departmental perspective, we need to remain impartial, and we have to ensure that we are doing. However, we are supporting gateway bodies in order to land their offers and promote their offers. And actually just today we've spent time with Lincoln College on a promotional call to a group of young people with the first tranche of their offers. And that's something that we expect to continue to do as those offers come through. So the first suite of offers they've gone to market with are within their own organisation. They'll be closely followed by other organisations that are connected to them. And we are seeing movement and growth in that partnership, which is really, really encouraging. And again, without taking sides, they are really well placed to be able to perform the role that they are intending to assist the Chamber with. And we're very grateful to them. Thank you. Next slide. So placement criteria. There is more detail of this on the next slide, I think, but fairly obviously, and Sam reflected the sensitive times, what we're very keen to ensure is that the jobs aren't created at the expense of others, which is a pretty reasonable situation to want to assure. So we do need to look at history of recent employment, history of recent employer status in terms of what their workforce has looked like over the recent past, and we can't countenance anything that creates reduction for others in order to create the opportunity. I mentioned before that it is a developmental scheme. The placements are designed to be that. And because there is no guarantee at the end of retention with the host employer or conversion into apprenticeship, then there are some expectations around developing the individual so that they do become more employable. So there are a few bullets there that suggest what those developmental steps may look like. Thank you. Next slide. So in terms of the application itself, there's some certain details that we require. So if a gateway body is making the application on behalf of employers, we'll need details that are referenced there. And ultimately, through the progression of the application process, the actual details of the job placements or job descriptions are needed and their location. And that's the final part of the process once approval is given. And then we can host and load that information on our systems, and I'll explain a little bit more about how that works as we go through. As referred to on previous slides, the job placements do need to be new ones and not just created for the purpose of the scheme. And also we do require some evidence of how and what the intention is around the employability, increased prospects that the young person will gather from the placement. So there are a range of options available. As we go through funding, I'll explain them in a bit more detail. But effectively, we don't have to, an employer doesn't have to pick a path that sends a young person through accredited training during the lifetime of the placement. If they want to orientate them around their workplace and the workplace practices, and they are developmental in themselves, which I'm sure there will be, then that's perfectly fine. However, the options do include the opportunity to engage through your gateway body to get some structured training in place and some progression through various elements, again, which will strengthen employability at the end of the placement. Next slide, please. So again, there's a couple of references here to examples of how to demonstrate placements in your for Kickstart scheme, and examples to demonstrate how additional support will be offered. So there is a variety of ways to assure that is part of the approval process. What we expect, again, talking in terms of how the scheme is administrated, what we're learning locally is just the progression of the applications that are going in through our link partners, the questions that are being asked of them, and the assurances that they're having to give. So we're not seeing anything too negative around that particularly. I think it's a fairly straightforward process. The issues in the first instances have been more centered around volume. So I mentioned that there's been some real strong interest. I think there's around 200,000 placements that are being progressed and worked through now. So as the scheme progresses, as that initial surge of interest is dealt with and processed and progressed, then it will start to get a little slicker, and there'll be quicker turnarounds for the application process. Next slide, please. So again, at the minute I mentioned, it's probably taking around a month from application to get the full approval through. That will speed up. We're sure of that. Also, once an organisation is in a position where they have been approved as a gateway, then they can just add continued vacancies as they come through to those. It's only in circumstances where there's a large intake that a separate submission would need to be made. It is a grant funding agreement that the gateway body, acting on behalf of their employers, enters into. Grant funding is not something that's necessarily new to DWP, but it may be new to some of the organisations that are linking through to us with this. The link on the previous slide sort of takes you through now. It is actually published what the terms of that grant funding is, and it does explain in detail what's required there. But it isn't anything revolutionary. But in order for us to get to the point that we can start the exchanges, we do need the grant funding agreement returned. We can do preparatory steps, as I mentioned, which we are doing through Lincoln College, because there's an absolute expectation that they will be approved. And what we don't want to do is log jam the process. We have to make sure that there are some preparatory steps in place. And the model that Lincoln College are using actually is a short course to orientate young people, and while simultaneously making them aware of what's available within their suite of offers currently, so that those preparatory steps are there. There's an expectation, or the young people know exactly what the expectation is of them, the do's and don'ts of being in and around a workplace. As again, I'm speaking very generally. I don't want to give the impression that everybody who comes through the scheme will have had no work experience, because that absolutely won't be the case. But it is crucial, and we do absolutely recognise the wish and the will of those gateway representatives to ensure that young people are orientated and to protect those employee relationships. We fully understand that. What it is fair to say is, obviously, whilst we're dealing with young people, I'm sure you can tell from your own experiences, plenty of stories of some occurrences that happen and that are commensurate with the age range. So I'm sure that they will still arise. It is young people that we're dealing with, but then just by the short intervention and the course that in Lincoln College's model, that is designed in some way to mitigate some of those early risks. But we do need to be in a position where the approval is in place to be able to progress and for people to be able to start. In terms of how the jobs are advertised, it's pretty much a straightforward job description. There's nothing too revolutionary around that. It's the type of information that you would usually advertise vacancies through, and your requirements are absolutely respected. If you want to recruit in the usual method, that's absolutely fine, but that would be a matter between yourselves as employers and the gateway body in terms of what that model looks like. Reflecting back on the Tesco vacancies we saw very early on in the scheme, then again there's 6-7 points pretty much on a template that asked for conventional things: job description, requirements, method of recruitment, method of interview. And again, if you're working through a gateway body, then we have seen examples, I think College have shared their experiences of how they exchange and interact with their employer base through apprenticeships, whereby they'll have some long-standing relationships where the employer is very confident for Lincoln College to recruit on their behalf, others less so, and want to have a hands-on involvement in the interview process. And all of the employer's wishes and requests are absolutely respected in the process. So if vacancies come our way, we'll act in accordance with what the employer requests are from those. Just mindful of Lincoln College's pre-employment model, that will afford opportunities for employer intervention and participation in those interviews, should the employer wish to do that. Thank you. Next slide, please. So just in terms of funding and how the modelling works. So what happens for a situation where the gateway body are the representative, we're not working directly with the employer, and there is an administrative fee that goes the way of the gateway body in the first week of the placement. Then there is also some wraparound funding, probably to describe it in those terms, £1,500, which is payable in the first week of the placement too as well. Now, if you're an employer working through a gateway body, that funding will go to the gateway body, and then it's an arrangement between the gateway body and the employer for that funding to be transferred across. So, for example, if there's a packaged offer, I'll say that the gateway body are making, which is inclusive of training, and then any fees that are involved for those training costs are a matter between the gateway body and the employer. And the sequencing of passing on that funding is also a matter for the gateway body to agree with the employer at the point of forming their own agreement. Just in terms of refund of wages, the way in which we see that the young person is employed is through real-time information that HMRC send through to ourselves at DWP. I think it downloads 4 times a day. So that's the method that we'll be able to track that wages are going through as agreed and do meet that level of 25 hours and at the national minimum wage. So we'll see it through those exchanges and on the individual's own universal credit claim, and that will be the trigger that then releases the sequential funding for repayment of wages. So I think the first payment comes through after 6-7 weeks of wages, and then thereafter it's on a monthly basis. Also, as the slide says there, it does include NI contributions and any automatic enrolment contributions. Thank you. I've pretty much just said that there in terms of the payment sequencing. So my apologies, I won't go and repeat all over that. What I didn't say from the outset is that we will obviously share these slides. They will be available to drop back into and check as an information resource. All I would say in respect of that is that because the scheme is evolving and is building, then there are lots of updates on gov.uk. So we've had a similar process when we're dealing with welfare reform and rolling out universal credit, that with lots of information packs that we were able to share at stakeholder events. But we always then did encourage that that's backed up by following the latest information on gov.uk, which will update, whereas these slides won't. They're kind of frozen in time for today's input. Thank you. Next slide. So our role, I've said lots of things about gateways and employers. Our role at DWP is to ensure that only eligible people are referred. So again, our national teams do act as a decision maker for the acceptance of applications. When the application is successful, we'll ensure that the job descriptions we receive are put in front of our work coaches. So work coaches is the latest terminology for our advisory service. So if we were operating in pre-COVID times, the advisory service would be the over-the-desk and virtual frequently more electronic interactions our advisory community would have with the customer base. So the way in which they'll be able to connect young people to the opportunities is the jobs aren't advertised on a wider platform. They're only on the Universal Credit platform. So there is a way there that young people can access those. On their homepage, on their claim, there's a variety of information, and one of which there's a special option now to look at the Kickstart vacancies in your locality. So that's one way in which young people can see what's available and of interest to them in and around the areas that they're looking for work, either the sectorial areas or the geographic areas. The other and probably more substantial way in which we'll connect young people to the opportunity is that our advisory service will match them or based on the job descriptions we receive to the aspirations they've said and shared and shown through previous dialogue and previous information given to ourselves. There is also a third way, which is that if you're dealing through a gateway body, and so in this case Lincoln College, obviously Lincoln College will be aware of the range of vacancies that they're handling, and so they'll be able to promote through their pre-employment model also what vacancies are available. So it's a fairly holistic way of making sure the information gets before the active customer base. Just to say also that there is no compulsion on young people to have to apply for a Kickstart vacancy. So we don't want to be generating people that are not genuinely interested. What we will see is young people, there's a range of options available to them. Kickstart is one of them. So and we do deal with young people from a range of settings and circumstances, as you can imagine, very diverse. And Kickstart won't always be the best option for them. It could be that they need some longer term intervention to get them to a position where they've progressed to a point that perhaps Kickstart is a consideration. There'll be others that come to us that are more able, more quickly to be able to access the wider labour market without the intervention of Kickstart. So we will see a range of situations and circumstances. And as you would expect with a large customer base with the volume we've seen previously, then there will be different circumstances. It isn't a one-size-fits-all by any means. That said, some of the brighter and better opportunities that come through are obviously going to be sought after, more so than some others may be. And there will be that competitive element there as well. And again, the employer will play a full part in that selection criteria. So we can get, or as much as we can, get the best candidate to you for the opportunity that's available at the time. Okay, so the final slide, I think, yes, just gives Ian and mine's contact details again. And just to say at this point, thanks very much for the opportunity again, Sam, I appreciate that. We are staying here to take questions. So I think for now, that's us. And then I'll come back to you, Simon, and then pick up any questions we've got from the audience.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Graham, for that. It's very in-depth, incisive look at where we are. And as I said before, this next part is really about getting the further details from you, your questions about how it might impact your organisation. We have got a hand up at the moment. We've got some questions in the Q&A session as well. So what I want to do is get through as many as possible of those. So the first one I'm going to try and do is the hand up, and I'm going to go to Deirdre Speed. I'm going to click to allow you to talk, Deirdre. So hopefully this is going to be seamless. Can you hear me? Are you okay to put your question to either Graham or Ian? Okay, so that's not as seamless as. Ah, there we go. Brilliant, Deirdre. Right, okay. Hello.
I was just a bit shocked because I wasn't aware that I had a question to put to you.
Ah, we've got your hand up.
Right. Oh, I see. Sorry. Yeah. I probably lent on that by mistake. How seamless was that? Can I just say it was very informative. Thank you very much. I was taking notice.
That's not a problem. Not a problem at all. Thank you. Thanks for that. I'll go to questions anyway. There's one that's in the box at the moment, which I'll just go through. Do encourage you though, if you've got any more questions, to keep putting them through. Then we will try and get through as many as possible. So this is from Chris Ellis. Chris has said that he is a new business, has started in January. He's asking about the due diligence checks. Ian has kind of responded to say not necessarily in terms of the inclusion of the company. Ian or Graham, do you want to just come in and give a few more details in terms of the due diligence for a small company that's just started and their eligibility into the scheme?
I'll defer to my colleague Ian there whilst I'm just catching up reading the question.
Okay. Ian, you're just muted at the moment, so
apologies, technology. So yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for being here today, first of all. So with regard to your question, Chris, so it's something that has become apparent to us fairly recently too, that the due diligence. So this is the guidance we have, and hopefully it will allow you a little bit of leeway in whether you can or cannot participate in the scheme. So you must demonstrate that the organisation is established, reputable and financially solvent. For example, have existed for a while. Seems a long time since January, so that's a while for me. Regularly and recently submitted accounts. Obviously that probably isn't the case, but it then goes on to sort of clarify, maybe have a credit score which is in a low risk category, have a low probability of imminent business failure, have enough liquid assets to pay debts, and do not have any recent county court judgments. So whilst the scheme may indeed be looking at the things such as accounts, things like that, there are other ways to demonstrate your financial and your long-term existence and hopefully continued existence in the labour market. So realistically, the answer I feel is no, it wouldn't permit you to not be part of the scheme. You are more than entitled to bid through and put your jobs on there. However, it might require a little more due diligence and more evidence on your part than perhaps somebody like Tesco's, for example, would have needed to have gone through. So, Graham, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, yeah, just to add to that, and thanks for that. Just on an internal call earlier today, actually, we've connected with various leads in and around the country, and one of them joined our call earlier and was saying exactly the same as you just said there, that in the early stages, because of volumes, then as we've worked through them, there have been some applications rejected. And then what's happened as a result of that is they've gone further into due diligence to be able to validate the application. So they're looking for more and more opportunity to approve than disapprove, absolutely for certain, because they want to be able to get the opportunities out there, particularly, not that there's a national intent to do this, but particularly our Ian and I's interest, especially working in the Lincolnshire area, which often sometimes in the smaller or more remote locations, people can miss out, and yet we know that we've got customers in those areas. We want to make sure that we've got the widest reach possible. So whatever we can do to help and support and assist, and we have been doing that with other applications to add further clarification, then we'll absolutely do that. The appetite is there to approve, but it's probably fair to say that's very helpful to hear the latest guidance. It would have been beneficial to have all of that guidance right from the outset, and again, that probably reflects the development in the scheme from a standing start. So we are getting to that point where there's more and more there available and there's more clarity. So I hope that helps.
Thanks, chaps. Chris, I hope that's helpful to you. If you want to come back, just raise your hand. Use the raise hand function at the bottom of the screen, and we'll bring you back in if you've got a further question that falls off the back of that. In the meantime, I'm just going to go over to a couple of more questions that are in the chat box. The first one is from Kate, and she asks, so should this young person be employed on a temporary contract?
So, thanks, Ian. Yeah. So no, I don't. Not necessarily. I think in terms of the placement, it's very clear, and the individual will know from the outset what the duration of the placement is. There's no guarantee beyond that by any means. So we're not advising anything. Certainly, we're not advising the customer of any other expectation than a 6-month duration. So in terms of the actual contractual term from an employer's perspective, I have to be honest and say I wouldn't know really around what you would do there. Where we've had similar questions is around along the lines of how do I treat the participant. Then the participant is treated pretty much the same as any other employee. So the same type of approach is required in that current insurance, they're covered by all of that, employer's liability, etc., etc. So just the same as if anybody was on a placement, it's the same type of criteria as that. So I wouldn't know kind of how you would regard somebody you took on a long-term placement currently, or whether you do, whether there are different arrangements for that. So I can't be precise on that one, I'm afraid.
Okay, so probably what's sensible in terms of that, if we just park that question, and we will vow to come back with an answer on that in terms of probably get a HR angle on it if that's okay, and we'll share that in the feedback after the session. Going to go on to another question now. This is from Rachel. I've recently interviewed and appointed a new apprentice. In the interview process, I had 2 other candidates who I thought would be good candidates for the Kickstarts. Can I approach them and ask them if they would be interested and if they are suitable? So the process has already gone through, the job's not been appointed, there are 2 candidates that weren't appointed at the time. Is it okay to continue and head towards a Kickstart placement for the 2 that weren't appointed?
Well, so on this one, there's a couple of caveats really. One is it's dependent on the individual's circumstances and status, bearing in mind that they have to be a universal credit recipient to be eligible. So there is no self-marketing angle as such with this employer subsidy scheme either. So unlike Future Jobs Fund, currently there isn't, unlike Future Jobs Fund and New Deal, where there was the option to do that. So it's difficult to be precise because it will depend entirely on the individual circumstances. If they're not a universal credit recipient, then no, they can't participate.
Okay. Hopefully that, Rachel, will answer the question. Again, if it's not, just feedback in terms of the chat, or just raise your hand and we'll come back on those. How would you've given us 2 questions there. The first one of those is if an employee is on furlough currently because of shielding, would this be a barrier to the Kickstart scheme? And probably the universal credit bit, I'm assuming, might apply to that, but guys, put me right or wrong.
So my understanding is it probably would be a barrier currently, because it will depend what part of universal credit the individual is on. So what we found in some of the earlier cases with furlough, so universal credit is a broad brush. There are different intervention regimes. There are different parts of the system that people enter. The figures I shared were those that are in what we refer to as the intensive section of universal credit, which is those that have a requirement to look for and participate for work. People on furlough don't necessarily have that. What we have experienced over the period of the pandemic is, in the first instance, middle of March, when people joined our registers, all of the previous processes and the touch points that people had to go through to validate a claim were all rescinded for the greater good, really, of being able to get people access to funds. So the whole claim process were rewritten for a 4-month period. And then since the middle of July onwards, we tried to reconnect with everybody that came to us during that period and put in place more of the usual requirements that apply. However, furlough has been a blocker. We have seen where people have on furlough have try to participate in various courses and things of that nature, and they tend to be, depending on their earnings, but they tend to be in a part of universal credit that means that we regard them as earning enough, and as a consequence they don't face the same requirements and they don't have the same eligibility. So it's not a blanket no, but it's unlikely.
Okay. And a follow-up there from Howard, would we be allowed to limit applicants to 18 years plus only? So I think you've got a cap of 24 as well, haven't you, in terms of age range?
So sorry, from 18, can you just repeat that one, Simon? I misunderstood.
Yeah, would we be allowed to limit applicants to 18 years plus only? So I think the question is driving at, is there anything younger than that in terms of a 16 to 18 that may be eligible?
So there would be, but again, the predetermination is then there would need to be on universal credit and eligible through that. So the amount of 16 and 17-year-olds that we have on our registers is very, very low. Usually, the candidates that we have are 18 plus only, simply because the way the benefit regulations work is that you need to be 18 plus to be able to claim universal credit, unless you are estranged from parental care or you are a carer for, a carer. So we have a very limited number of people that are under 18 that are that come through our hands.
Some fairly quick ones, I hope, here in terms of ones that I've had before. If somebody wanted to keep a young person past the 6 months part of the agreement, is there a problem to that?
So, well, there is no extension beyond 6 months as per the grant funding. So if somebody wanted to do that, that would be absolutely fine, but it wouldn't be funded under Kickstart.
So the employer would pick up the full employment and consequential cost of that as well. That's right.
Yes. Yeah.
And in terms of if somebody didn't want to pay the minimum amount, could they pay more? So is there a problem monitoring that through the relevant scheme where you find out what they've been paid? Is it a problem that it's been paid more than what the minimum amounts are?
No, absolutely not. No, we'd encourage that wherever possible. What our assurance centres around is just assurance that that minimum is in place. But what we would expect is that for young people in that age range, their entitlements are such that they wouldn't, wages through Kickstart will probably mean that they then don't receive any other universal credit unless they are living independently and there's some housing costs involved, or they have young children or something of that nature, and then it kind of works on a sliding scale. But there's absolutely no problem with paying beyond the minimum requirements. The problem centre around anything that arises where the payments are below the minimum requirements. So say, for example, the hours drop and then it starts to create a few issues from that perspective.
So interesting. I'm going to return back to the shielding question and the person who's on furlough at the minute, because there's another question in the chat box that is questioning the interpretation of the question. So we might just bring Howard in if he's not satisfied with the answer. We've just been asked to clarify if you're actually looking for the person who is shielding and on furlough at the moment to have a temporary placement put in place, i.e. that a young person be put in place to fulfill the role while the other person is on furlough. Is that available? Howard, if you're willing, I'm going to allow you just to talk, if that's okay. I think you just need to press your unmute button, and maybe just want to clarify exactly the point there in terms of the relationship between the person who's shielding and is it a new person or is it that person?
Yeah, hello. No, it's an employee that we've currently got employed, but they're shielding because of medical reasons. I just wanted to know, would their job be allowed to be, well, presumably it will finish on the 2nd of December anyway, but would that be a barrier to us taking somebody on from the Kickstart because we have somebody who is on furlough?
Okay, that's brilliant. And are you satisfied with the response that you've been given? Or is there any other part that you want to pick up on that?
No, that's fine. But
brilliant. Thank you for clarifying that. That's great. Just going on to our next question now is, Can you post your job description on social media as long as you state applications must be on universal credit, or does the job have to be posted on a specific platform?
So with that one, the jobs have to be posted and applied for through universal credit. So that's what kind of confirms the eligibility. That said, the employer's free to market it in the way they usually would for a vacancy, but it would have to be conditional on the applicant being eligible, and it's only through application via universal credit that can be ascertained. But it would be fine to promote more widely. All I would say is, obviously, that might bring in some uncertainty around being able to confirm eligibility from that perspective. However, what we are seeing, particularly now in a virtual world, is that, and our operational models well, they're starting to return to, well, I won't say normal, but they're starting to return to a bit more of a consistent imprint and input and rotational interaction with the customer base, which is how we would have operated pre-COVID. What we do currently have is a range of options and offers through link partners that do use social media in order to be able to reach out to a wider audience. And the crucial thing there is that just that it's known and understood that the point of application has to be through ourselves so we can assure eligibility. But we are already doing that for a range of some of the offers that we have.
Okay, that's great, thank you. This one's from Farhat, and you may want to come in here and just ask some further detail on this for some more specific responses. But what if the employer is new who has not employed anyone yet? Is there a challenge there? Presumably registering on the right systems, but is there anything else to look out for, or any other conditions there besides potentially the governance issues you talked about earlier?
Well, I'll defer to Ian on that one because I think that probably centres around the input he gave previously. So, Ian, if you could come in.
Thank you, Graham. Yeah, I agree. It kind of links into the Chris Ellis question. As long as you can demonstrate your own employment eligibility, but also it's not something that would stop you from applying, Farhat, because realistically, what this is about is kickstarting not just the young people but also the employer as well. So it's only natural that you would use it as a growth opportunity. So no, there's no restriction. Just bear in mind the other conditions, and obviously we get our information from HMRC, real-time information. So they would have to be enrolled on like payroll. So that we could actually get that information. So it might require you a little bit of work to do that side of things, but that's the only stumbling block I could possibly see. Nothing that couldn't be jumped over fairly comfortably, I'd imagine.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks, Farhat. If you need to ask further details on that, just come back on the chat and we'll be more specific in terms of any other elements that link to that question. Again, I've got a couple of fairly quick ones. One of which is, can I employ a family member under the Kickstart scheme? Is there any due diligence governance about employing a family member who meets the universal credit threshold?
No, I think if they meet the eligibility criteria, I don't think that's a blocker.
Okay.
I agreed, yeah.
And is there a time limiting period to be able to use the scheme as such? Is there a time limit yet by which applicants need to be signed up?
No, the scheme's open now for applications either directly from employers or through gateway representative bodies. And as long as any employment offer can be made through one or other of those channels, then they'll be able to be made up to and including the 31st of December 2001, with a view to those placements lasting 6 months and running into May, June 2022.
Okay, thanks. In terms of, maybe not for the today's audience this, but is there a maximum number of placements? I think you've suggested Tesco there were using the scheme, so it suggests there might not be, but are there a maximum number of placements you can have on or using the scheme?
No, we're kind of open to as many offers as potentially we can get, and we've had an underlying statement of intent from our minister to say that if we get to, in the two unlikely situations that we get to running out of young people, then we'll increase the age range. And the other is if we get to a position where the 2 billion has been and gone, it will be added to.
Okay, thanks. And what happens if a young person, for whatever reason, doesn't manage the 6-month placement? Is there a challenge issue? Is it just that you won't be paid for the amount of the rest of the placement? Is there anything else to consider if there are decisions to end the placement on either side?
Ian, did you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, it's exactly as you said, Simon, really, in that you will be paid up until the point that you stop paying that person. As it is a very similar employment arrangement to any other employee that you have, same rights and responsibilities work both ways, obviously. So there is a query perhaps around about the spending of the £1,500 and whether there'd be any recompense in that. But the answer to that one at the moment is if you had spent £1,000 and then it didn't work out, you would only pay back the £500 that you were yet to spend, which maybe covers on to the next question quite well.
Indeed, well linked, very nicely there. So what kind of things is the £1,500 payment for? The example there, is it for computers, or can it be spent on anything with regard or relating to the placement? Do
you want to carry on, Ian?
Yeah, sure, thank you. Yeah, so this is perhaps the most exciting part of the Kickstart scheme from my point of view, in a way, because the gift is entirely in the employer and working with the young person or their representative as to what that is spent on. So a representative might keep a proportion of that, £1,500 to provide some of the employability support, which is a key word that I would use when talking about the £1,500. So whatever it is spent on has to make the person more employable throughout the 6 months and over the period of the time of the 6 months, and then afterwards, obviously. So I've talked to quite a few employers and representatives, so the Lincoln College offer will include some parts of that, but another employer is looking at using it to buy a CSCS card, forklift truck license, some of the more technical sort of manual handling qualifications, first aid at work and things like that, or perhaps a bit more specific for a younger person, the travel costs that they may have to incur to get to the job. I know one employer is definitely looking at using it for driving license and driving lessons, with the view of getting that young person to be able to be more useful to the business and perhaps perform a delivery role as well as the marketing role that they're employed for. Uniform, PPE, that sort of thing is certainly something that it could be used for. So yeah, the list is endless, as long as it meets the question, is this going to be spent on something that makes this person more employable? So computer's a really good example, might allow them to work at home at times where lockdown means they can't come into the office and such like. So that's probably the best example, but it depends how creative you are, I suppose. So it's the honest answer.
Fantastic. Okay, this is going to have to be the final question because we've got to 1:58, and therefore the promise of between 45 minutes and an hour is becoming ever closer. So the last question I've got on my list here is about just definition of additionality in terms of an additional job to the organisation. So in certain organisations, I can imagine jobs are fairly similar in terms of their job specification. Is there a definition for an additional job that could make it any clearer, or is it just as simple as a new job that is created within the organisation for the purposes of employing that young person for a period of 6 months?
I would say the latter. I think that sums it up and describes it very well. So something that wasn't already pre-planned, wasn't already there, but the scheme creates the opportunity to engage somebody in.
Okay, Kate, are you, Ian? Yes, you've answered that question for me. So Kate, that was just a follow-up on that question before. It has got to 1:59, so I'm just going to have to bring questions to a halt there. I'm going to answer one, I think, that Howard put in there that was responded to directly as well. But for now, I'm going to say thank you for joining us today, and we hope you found that really invaluable in terms of the hour you've spent with us. I'd like to say a huge thank you to Ian and Graham. Insightful presentation, and thanks very much for being direct on all the answers that you've given. I understand that we've got to come back with at least one answer in terms of follow-up, which we'll do in terms of the things that we send round after today's event. If you want to find out more, there is more on our website about the scheme, and the guys have mentioned before, we are working with Lincoln College in terms of being a gateway into the scheme. If you go onto our website, on the recovery and support tab, if you click there on Kickstart, it will take you down to an inquiry form, and we can take the inquiry there, and we will work with Lincoln College in terms of that relationship and making sure that that's taken through. We do have some more Chamber Connect webinars coming up, and just a little plug for those at this particular point. So we've got some skills planning and funding workshop that's on tomorrow between 10 and 12. We've got some surviving and thriving workshops on the 26th between 2:30 and 3:30, and it's soon going to be 30 days till Brexit, and don't groan at that one, but we have got a customs webinar on there on the 1st of December to make sure those organisations that have an international trade link are aware of the customs challenges with regard to the transition. If you'd like to know more about our events, links-chamber.co.uk is the place to look. If you've got any feedback, events@links-chamber.co.uk is an email address to send some further feedback to. Thank you once again for attending this session, and I hope, and I'm sure the guys do, we hope you have a very productive afternoon as well. Thank you for now. Take care. Bye-bye.